Hi, everyone, and welcome to Spiritual Journey with Sudha. Oh, such a beautiful day today in Reading, Pennsylvania. We are here at WXAC 91.3 FM enjoying sunshine with some light breezes, and the temperatures are in the high 80s. And we're going to talk today a little bit about spirituality. So just as a reminder, last week we touched base on definitions for spirituality and mindfulness. And one of the definitions that we discussed was that spirituality is a boundaryless dimension of human experience. It is something that we cannot plan for. We cannot necessarily go after it. It's something that we have to surrender to. It can't be exactly defined because it's different for every single person who experiences it. It really is just our sense of aliveness. It's our ability to be alive in this moment and to have any type of an experience with that aliveness. So it might involve compassion. It may involve love. It may involve anger. It may involve frustration. It may involve peace and calm. It involves all aspects of life without exception. So to be alive is to be spiritual, and to have a spiritual experience is to have a mindful experience, one where we are paying attention on purpose. So now moving into this week's discussion is about happiness and yoga. So happiness, what exactly is that? Well, it's the experience of peace within oneself. And if you ask anybody you know, no matter who they are, what exactly they want from this life, to look at the big picture of things, what they're going to say to you is that on some level they just want to be happy. They don't want to suffer. They want to experience peace. And so spirituality is something that calls us to our potential happiness. It allows us to become curious about those things in life that build us up into this experience of happiness versus tear us down into the experience of suffering. Spirituality empowers us through this inquiry to see, to recognize, and to interact mindfully with the experience of suffering, so that we recognize the four truths that the Buddha pointed out. The first truth is that all human beings suffer. All beings of a biological nature suffer, really, without exception. And the second truth is that there's a reason for that suffering. The third truth is the reason is grasping, that we grasp at things, we want to be something other than what they are. And that grasping is a sense of dissatisfaction and an inability to hold space for the way things are. And then the fourth truth that the Buddha shared was that there is a way to end suffering, and that is to stop grasping. And he offered an eightfold path to do just that. Which we'll go into at another point in time on another future episode. So this potential happiness, this recognition of suffering, and both of those things empower us to experience compassion. And compassion is the ability to identify with the experience of suffering and with the experience of happiness, that we can come into a place in our own heart where we are truly grateful that other people can be happy, that they can experience peace and calm and joy and contentment. They can experience love. And when they're experiencing suffering, we understand what that's like too. We understand that we don't particularly care for that, and so therefore they mustn't also. So we can hold compassion for them. And by holding compassion, we are not holding into critical judgment, the type of judgment that harms others. So we come to the point in the conversation on spirituality now where we're saying, so we kind of have an idea of what spirituality is. We have an idea of what mindfulness is, paying attention on purpose. So what exactly is a spiritualist besides a person who practices spirituality? Well, in our world today, there's a lot of discussion about what an appropriate spiritualist is. There's some ideas that there is a right way and a wrong way to experience a practice of spirituality and even a practice of religion, really. What spirituality tells us is that the practices that come forward for people are as diverse as the experiences of spirituality. So what do I mean by that? Well, there are many different kinds of spiritualists. The first type of spiritualist is the one who is indifferent, the one who is not interested. No one needs to agree. So there's a sense of indifference with regard to what anybody else is doing. They are completely independent in their own path and in their own knowing of the divine, of God, of goddess, of the earth, and they're not concerned with other people agreeing with them. So this type of an individual practitioner would probably be a little bit of a loner. They wouldn't be looking for organized religion. They would not even be looking for organized spirituality. They will tend to come and go, and they will tend to have a very, very personal experience of their spiritual nature that is not dependent on input by anybody else. There's also a spiritualist that is called a practitioner, and your individual who's indifferent to organization can also be a practitioner, of course, because they have a curiosity. They want to learn. They want to know. And so they set out purposefully asking questions and seeking out experiences that are going to inform them about this spirituality and about this spiritual life. The curious seeker is the next one. And this is similar to the practitioner, except a practitioner is someone who has some amount of time and investment. The curious seeker is the one who has questions. They are maybe not so invested in a practice yet. They're asking big questions, though. Who am I? What is the meaning of this life? What is it that I'm missing in this life? What is the potential of this life? What is the potential of happiness? And so this individual is a curious student, the person who is either just starting and has not quite found their practice yet, or they are the person who holds into their curiosity even after finding a practice that has been with them for a short or a long period of time. The next type of spiritualist is the mystic. And the mystic is a contemplative individual who is connecting to the mystery, to the higher truths such as oneness and meaningful joy. And this is the type of individual who is not afraid to make sacrifices. They're not afraid to look at the deeper questions and to address the issue of their own suffering in a very honest way. So the mystic is also one who is looking at the subtle energies that are present in the world, in nature, and in other beings that are around them. And they're not as concerned with the physical nature of things. They really want to get into the subtle energy and into the deeper connection of oneness. Your mystics might be able to read energy. They might be able to see things that your average individual is not able to see. For example, there are mystics out there who say that they can see auras. They can actually, with the naked eye, see the colors that are surrounding you. And based on that, they're connecting with your subtle energy on a very deep level versus the physical energy only. The next type of spiritualist is the prophet. And the prophet is a contemplative also. And they teach alignment with the truth, and they exemplify that truth, and they are a servant to humanity. Mystics will tend to be a little bit alone. They will, maybe teachers, possibly, but mystics really do enjoy the one-to-one experience of themselves with all that is, with regard to the divine, whereas the prophet is teaching. They're actively moving out into the world. They're actively engaging others in the conversation of oneness and the conversation of divinity and sacredness. The prophet is the one who is coming forth, similar to how Jesus came forth, and showing the way. So they are way showers. The next is the warrior, and the warrior is the activist. And it's true that all spiritualists are activists on some level, but the warrior spiritualist is a purposeful activist, and their activism is nonviolent in action. So they are activating for the sake of goodness and the sake of peace, and they are taking a firm stand in order to empower peace in the world, and they don't resort to violence. They don't resort to harming others in order to get their message across. So this concept of nonviolence, what exactly is that? Well, it's action that is not committed due to a sense of superiority, hate, prejudice, jealousy, or fear. Nonviolent action is action that is based in compassion, love, and unity. It is not selfish or self-centered in a way that is destructive or harmful. It is focused in oneness or acceptance or surrender. Nonviolence in yoga is called ahimsa, and I believe we mentioned that during the last show. And ahimsa is considered to be a foundational principle for any spiritual practice, a foundational principle for any life that is looking to awaken, for any person who is looking to experience true, meaningful, and lasting happiness. Nonviolence is a must. It is an absolute necessary ingredient. So, what kind of spiritualist are you? You take a little bit of time maybe this week and think about that. Think about, where do you stand in this list of practitioners and seekers? Are you, a bit indifferent to what other people think? Are you just simply seeking to make your own path in the world without too much direction from anyone? Are you someone who's already embedded in a practice? You have maybe a Buddhist practice or a Christian practice or a Wiccan practice, and you're there and you want to learn and you have committed yourself. Are you curious, whether a beginner or an experienced spiritualist? Are you asking questions? And if you've been on your path now for, a year, 2 years, 10 years, and you're no longer asking questions, then what can you do to revitalize your curiosity? Because curiosity is a very important part of your spirituality. We should never stop asking questions, never stop seeking deeper and deeper and more expansive truths. Are you a mystic? Do you have, experiences that are difficult to explain and express? Experiences that are connecting on a really deep level, but maybe confusing mentally and emotionally? Do you see energy? Do you see patterns where other people don't? Do you connect empathetically with people? Do you connect deeply with God and Goddess? Are you a prophet? Are you a teacher? Are you the person who's going out and living an aligned life so that other people can learn from your example? And maybe you're also a warrior, an activist with a specific purpose, and that purpose is based in nonviolent action for the sake of goodness and peace. Again, what kind of spiritualist are you? Take some time, think about it. Maybe you are different kinds, depending on the moment and depending on the situation that you find yourself in. A spiritualist who is experienced navigates through all these different definitions based on where they find themselves in any given moment. So the next thing we're going to talk about after this very short break is going to be a little bit about yoga and where non-harming and spirituality fall into this very popular practice in the West today that originated in India some 5,000 to 10,000 years ago. But for now, we're going to move into our first PSA. And so here is today's upcoming concerts and events announcement. So coming up on October 12th, we have Tucker Carlson live. Wow, that's pretty great and interesting. On the 15th and 16th, we have Paw Patrol live. And on October 18th, we have Casting Crowns at the Arena. Creeps with Kids comedy tour featuring Robert Kelly, Rob Bennington, Rich Voss, and Jim Florentine at the Performing Arts Center. So lots of great and amazing things coming up in October. I hope that you are able to step out and step into these wonderful experiences. And so now we're heading back into the conversation with regard to spirituality. And today, again, we're talking about yoga. And so what is yoga? Many people have an idea that yoga is a series of postures that they take in their 60-minute class that they attend at their local favorite yoga studio. And that is a small part of yoga. But it is not the entirety of yoga. And as a matter of fact, it's not even a major part of yoga. Yoga is a practice that is between 5 and 10,000 years old. It originated in India, and initially it was a series of techniques that led to an experience of unity, a reconnection. And the word yoga actually means reunion. It means to be reunited. Reunited with what? Well, reunited with yourself, reunited with the divine, whatever it is that you consider to be representative of that. And early on, many of the teachers taught about yoga verbally. They did not write it down. And so the information about yoga was transferred from teacher to student orally. At some point in time, an individual named Patanjali wrote an amazing treatise called the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And in there, he defines yoga from his perspective, and his is one perspective. There are many, many, many perspectives. India is a very large, dynamic, and diverse place with a lot of large, dynamic, and diverse ideas. Patanjali, potentially 3,000 years ago, stated, Yogas chitta vritti nirodha. He said, yoga is the cessation of the fluctuation of the mind. So the way that he defined yoga was that when your mind is peaceful, when your mind is not fluctuating and jumping from idea to idea, irritation to irritation, and distraction to distraction, that you are potentially experiencing yoga. To add to that, we can say that there are a few things that we have to become skillful at in order to experience a peaceful mind, a truly peaceful mind, a mind that is not jumping from distraction to distraction. And the first thing that we need to experience and to become skillful about is controlling our senses and our temper. So yoga is very much about controlling our senses, the outward direction of our senses, the constant involvement in drama and the constant involvement in, many different things that are pulling us in many different directions. So the first thing that we can understand from Patanjali's definition of yoga is that the experience of peace in the mind requires that we calm down and that we not be overly attached to our senses. The second thing that his statement on yoga indicates to us is that there must be a practice available somewhere in order for us to experience this calming down of the senses, this control of the senses, and this peace within. And that practice for Patanjali would specifically be concentration and meditation. And as a matter of fact, Patanjali lays out an 8-fold path where he says any serious seeker of yoga can follow this 8-fold path and experience the ultimate potential of yoga, which is reunion with the divine and with all that is sacred. All they have to do is practice what are called the yama, the niyama, the asana, the pranayama, the pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. They need to practice the 5 observances, the 5 secondary observances or restraints. They need to practice physical postures, and the only physical posture that Patanjali really talked about was seated postures that are useful in meditation. After the postures, then they could start practicing pranayama, which is breath control. So specific breathing practices. And the breathing practices lead us to the ability to withdraw our senses from situations where we would otherwise become distracted and potentially violent or irritated. From the sense withdrawal, we can then move into concentration practices, followed by meditation practices, and then finally absorption. Samadhi is a form of absorption where we recognize our sameness. We recognize our sameness with each other. We recognize the heart's longing to be reunited with our source, with the creator or the creatrix, with God, with goddess, with whatever term it is that you'd like to put to that. That there's this longing in the heart to no longer be alone. You know, have you ever been in a room with maybe a couple of dozen people and you still feel like there's no one there but you, and it's a very empty feeling? Well, this call to yoga is a call to return to a place of oneness where that type of lonely feeling takes on a bit of a different meaning. It takes on an understanding and a depth of empathy and compassion. And And the understanding is that we really are never alone. We're never truly alone. We're walking this path together. We are suffering together. We are healing together. And we are seeking the ultimate truth together, even in moments where we don't recognize it. And then if you want to become a bit more esoteric in that, we can also say that the divine is always with us, always with us. In certain lineages of yoga, it's understood that there is a light within each of us. And for those practitioners out there who have said the term namaste, that's what namaste means. It means that I acknowledge the light that exists within you. It is the same light that exists within me. And when we acknowledge that light truly and completely, then we are recognizing yoga. We are recognizing reunion. We're recognizing oneness. So then the withdrawal of the senses, takes on a really important practice for us. It's kind of like, what is your go-to when you're angry? What is your go-to when you're frustrated? What is your go-to when you're fearful? And we start looking at that and we start making changes. And we say, well, I'm not going to react to stress by eating all the time. I'm not going to be a stressful eater anymore. Or I'm not going to lash out at people and just accuse them of doing things that I have no grounds for accusing them of doing. And that includes myself. I'm not going to lash out at myself anymore either. And we start taking small steps, not large steps, potentially, but small steps in the direction of greater kindness. We start taking small steps in the direction of greater acceptance. In yoga, what we call surrender. And then eventually, this practice of non-attachment or sense withdrawal actually becomes a concentration practice where we're paying attention more and more on purpose. We're paying attention, and we start to see this inherent beauty that exists everywhere. We start to recognize that there are, there's beauty in the flowers, there's beauty in the blue sky, there's beauty in the people that we meet along the way, there's beauty in the storm, there's beauty in the struggle, and there's even beauty in the suffering, as Gandhi said during his life. There's beauty in everything if you have eyes that are willing to remain open to seeing the beauty, while also a heart that is active in supporting the greater healing. So we're kind of, as spiritualists, working in two realms. We're working to acknowledge and recognize the goodness while working, wholeheartedly to minimize the suffering. Understanding that there's beauty and there's potential. There are seeds present in the suffering, but we're not meant to just allow the suffering to happen. We're meant to be active with one another, to support one another, to overcome these artificial boundaries that we have put in place that are based in prejudice and hate and fear, and superiority. We're meant to step down off of our high horse and recognize that we have been harmful in this life, and that our happiness will come more fully to us if we embrace the path that brings about happiness. So yoga's chitta vritti nirodha, yoga is a cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. And this eightfold path that Patanjali put in place for us to follow so that we could realize this ultimate potential of yoga, which again is reunion with all that is sacred, including source. The sense withdrawal takes us into the concentration practices, and the concentration will naturally and spontaneously lead us to a state of meditation. Meditation is not the same as concentration. For those meditators that are listening, you sit down and you focus on the breath, or you focus on a mantra, or you focus on the visualization of an object. That is a concentration practice. When you lose that practice and you forget that you are there, that is closer to the state of meditation, which can't really be uniformly described in words. It's simply the losing of the ego self. It is losing the identification and the preference and entering into a deep state of peace. And then from that deep state of peace, the next natural thing that arises spontaneously is samadhi, is the sense of being awakened. Not awakened in this idea that, hey, I know I'm sitting here and I'm doing this meditation and I'm really enjoying myself right now. But your heart becomes awakened. Your heart becomes awakened and your mind actually becomes significantly quiet. And then that individual who enters into the awakened state of samadhi sits or walks or interacts in a way that is absolutely non-harming, completely accepting, full of surrender, and saturated with love. So some interesting thoughts for everyone today on this first definition of yoga. And there are many, many definitions of yoga, and we'll be exploring those, over the coming weeks. But this first one is pivotal because Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are considered to be a primary scripture, a primary writing in yoga that students are meant to follow. And when we look at his first 2 steps on his Eightfold Path, the first is a combination of 5 practices that are called the yamas. The first thing he talks about is non-harming. So if you're looking at this from a linear importance, what he's saying is this is the first thing that you need to pay attention to as a spiritualist, as a yoga practitioner, as a religious individual, as somebody who is interested to come to know themselves in a way that leads them into a deeper, more profound relationship with the divine. The first thing you need to do is contemplate non-harming, is to contemplate where in your life you have been harmful to others, where you have been violent to others, and then take steps to rectify that. It's not a matter of, chastising yourself and coming into a relationship of harm with yourself. No, the harm of your own self has to stop too. It's about love, and it is about acceptance, and it is about, resolution to be a better person. I love, there's a movie out there, I think it was Jack Nicholson, and I can never remember the girl's name. But in there, he says to her as they're sitting at the table, you make me want to be a better man, right? Well, this spiritual life makes us all want to be better people. And then the path is figuring out exactly what that means. Exactly what that means. Because for one person, it might mean that they have to really work to treat themselves in a kinder way. And for other people, it might mean that they really need to work on treating others in a kinder way. And for others, it may mean both. So where does this yoga take us to? The first place it takes us to is an inquiry into the essence of nonviolence and non-harming. From there, it takes us into non-stealing. And so the second yama, or the second part of this first step on Patanjali's Eightfold Path, non-stealing, and then truthfulness, followed by non-grasping and an economy of personal energy. So these 5, they are laying out for us the platform where the first changes can be made. First, we stop harming, we stop practicing violence, and we adopt love and compassion instead. And that is not as easy as it sounds. But in order to accomplish that, Patanjali tells us right away what we need to do. We need to stop stealing, we need to stop lying, we need to stop grasping, and finally, we need to be a little bit more economical with our energy. Don't get so overly involved in every single situation. Stop being a fixer. Don't be a fixer. Be someone who consciously listens, who consciously contemplates, and then who applies their energy in the best possible way, if in fact at all, in service of humanity, in service of all beings that are alive on this earth. That is the best investment of our energy, the best investment of our power, and the best investment of our resources. So the first step, nonviolence, followed by these other 4 yama. The word yama means control or restraint. And these other 4 are telling us how to achieve this nonviolence. It's saying, stop stealing. And that's not just not taking what doesn't belong to you as in a physical object. It's also don't steal people's time. Don't steal someone else's limelight. Be generous. Don't be greedy. And truthfulness. And so not lying to others, not lying to ourselves. But truthfulness is also, it involves having the courage to see and accept the greater truth, the truth that pretty much all of us avoid, and that is the truth of our own goodness. We get caught up in drama, and we get caught up in cycles of fear and cycles of like and dislike, and we know in our heart and in our gut what it is that is right action versus wrong or harmful action. And yet so oftentimes we swerve over toward the harmful action. Well, what this particular yama is telling us is go the opposite way. Go toward the truth. Wayne Dyer, who was a very profound spiritualist and an empowerment speaker, he has many, many great books. In one of his books called There's a Spiritual Solution to Every Problem, he states, there is like this linear timeline for your spiritual expression in this life. One expression takes you closer to the divine, to God, to goddess, and the other expression takes you further away from it. And what Patanjali is asking us to do is to investigate those behaviors that are taking us further away from our true self and from the ultimate experience of oneness, and start shifting those behaviors so that they are, in fact, meeting the potential of oneness and unity. So the second set are the niyamas, and the niyamas are cleanliness, contentment, discipline, self-study, and devotion. And again, we can now look at these niyamas, these observances, these things that we need to practice. And, cleanliness, what is that? Well, it's not just being physically cleanly, it's also being emotionally clean, mentally clean, clear about our intentions, and to hold into intentions that have no violence to them. And that requires that we experience a sense of contentment, because oftentimes, the ego wants to have its own way. The ego wants to have its heyday. The ego wants to be able to grab onto circumstances and become the one who is in control, the one who is powerful. And that's when the ego is not balanced. And sad to say that in most of us, most of the time, the ego is out of balance to some degree. When the ego is balanced, it allows love to be given and received freely. When the ego is not balanced, it is seeking out situations that will bring about a high level of drama and something to talk about. So in order to hold into our contentment and to hold into our cleanliness, we need to have discipline. And that's what tapas is. Tapas is discipline. It's the ability to stay with your spiritual practice, to stay with your intention, to stay with whatever it is that you have dedicated yourself to that brings about the greater goodness and the greater potential within yourself, and that also empowers that potential in others. So we're going to take a little pause there, and we're going to possibly not take a little pause there. As we're looking here at the CD player, I have to play you an announcement, and then a little later I'll play you a song or two, and then after the song we'll come back and do a blessing. But for now, here is our PSA, and I will be right back following this. Okay, welcome back. So I hope that PSA was informative for you. And this is Sudha, and I am here on WXAC 91.3 FM in Reading, Pennsylvania on the Albright College campus. And this is Spiritual Journey with Sudha. Today we have been talking about spirituality, spiritualists, and yoga. And right now we are touching base on the Eightfold Path of Patanjali. And in this Eightfold Path, the first two parts of this are the yama and the niyama, or the restraints and the observances. And we are currently talking about discipline. So I think one of the things that tends to turn people off in this modern day of spirituality and, given this amazing exodus that is happening from organized religions, is this idea of discipline, because it's greatly misunderstood. Discipline is not a four-letter word. Discipline is not something to be afraid of. It's actually an empowering quality that brings about a great sense of freedom and a great sense of stability and groundedness. I'd really love to get into this conversation about what allows us to feel grounded versus what causes us to feel shaky, ungrounded, and insecure. But I think that for today, I'll limit it to saying that the conditions in the world today, where so many people, the majority of people, are driven by fear and are afraid of the unknown, that this has caused this kind of popular feeling of being anxious and stressed out and uncertain. And certainly just the economics of the world and the violence in the world and many unfortunate circumstances that are happening in the world, people not having enough to eat, not being able to pay their bills, all these things are contributing. There's really not job security like there used to be. Education costs so much. All these different things are all contributing to a sense of imbalance, of lack of stability, and a sense of shaky anxiety. So within the yoga tradition, this word tapas means discipline. And I like to also add the word compassionate in there, compassionate discipline, that an individual who practices compassionate discipline accepts the instabilities of the world, accepts the uncertainties of the world, and releases the need to try to control everything, and instead moves into a deep sense of faith. So the word faith in Sanskrit, which is the language of yoga, is Shraddha. Shraddha means that which you bring to it. And faith is what we can most closely translate that as in English. So the amount of faith that you have, that whether you are high on the mountain or low in the valley, whether you have a job that's paying you six figures or a job that is paying minimum wage, that you're holding into this faith that it all has a far more important meaning than the physical value that we put on it. This is so important because the tapas, the discipline, is what allows us to accept that as a possibility and as a potential. And our discipline is also about getting into our practice and being with our practice in a very consistent way on a regular basis over a long period of time with little to no interruption and with great enthusiasm, that we keep coming back to it, that we keep bringing ourselves back to our practice and to our intention and to presence, to our mindfulness and to our dedication to have that connection with the divine and with each other as well. And then from this tapas, from this compassionate discipline, comes self-study. Self-study is such an important aspect of spirituality. You got to know yourself. That's what spirituality is all about. It's about coming to know ourselves in the light of truth and in a larger truth, not just the little truth of the stories that we tell ourselves, or I should say the false truth of the stories that we tell ourselves about not being good enough. It's the higher truth. It's like we're all here for reasons. We're all here with purpose. We're here to support one another. We're here to walk alongside one another. We're here to walk each other home. We're here to recognize and to empower each other's awakening to whatever degree we can. And so this self-study is really important. And in Sanskrit, which again is the language of yoga, it's the ancient language of India, this word is svadhyaya, to study the self. So the first part of this practice is to study ourself, to recognize what our behaviors are, what our tendencies are, what our triggers are, and then to make mindful adjustments, adaptations, and accommodations so that we can move into a healthier way of being. The second level of svadhyaya is to understand who we are in light of whatever scripture it is that we are studying. So for myself personally, I study all scriptures, some more than others, but I'm always looking for the common thread that runs through that tells us about our sacred nature, that tells us about our potential, and then to come to understand myself in light of those words. So the swadhyaya is really important, and it is an integral practice, in any spirituality. And then finally, that brings us to what's called Ishvara Pranidhana. And Ishvara is another name for God. Ishvara, that which is divine. Ishwari, the name of the goddess, the masculine and the feminine of divinity. And Pranidhana is to be devoted to that, to be devoted to having a relationship with that. I believe we touched a little bit last time on the fact that to be spiritual means you're having an experience of relationship in this life. And what relationship that is really up to you. There's no wrong or right way, even if you find yourself in a deep, deep state of suffering, there is still no wrong or right way. It's really about what you take out of it. Sometimes we get a little lost. Other times we get found. When we're found, we'll know we're found because we feel a deeper and more profound connection to all that is. So now we're going to take a little break for a few moments, and then I will be back to do a closing blessing. So please enjoy these selections. Talk to you in a moment. Hi, and welcome back. So I hope you enjoyed the music, and we're coming to a close now for this week's Spiritual Journey with Sudha. And in closing, I would just like to ask you if you're in a safe place to do so, not driving your car, of course. Maybe just close the eyes or simply allow yourself to soften and take a nice breath in, a nice breath out. Inquire of yourself, practicing swadhyaya, practicing self-study. Inquire of yourself, what do you wish to be, a calm ocean or a stormy sea? And if your answer is a calm ocean, then what do you need to do in your life in order to realize that? What actions do you need to take or change, adapt, adjust, or accommodate in order to be the calm and not the storm? Sending you all so many blessings today and every day. Carry each other in love and peace. Walk side by side in honor and respect. Hold space and be the goodness in the world. Namaste.